Well, I'll stay on time. I know I'm between you and lunch, so we're just going to raise the chairs a little bit here. So I was thinking about what could be the most impactful thing that I could share with technology leaders here today at this summit and leaders that are wrestling with technology. It really came down to disruption. I learned over the course of my career that for technology to be successful and for it to really have an impact, it needed to be bundled with a strategy, a solid strategy. And so when you ever see technology that's maybe struggling to get traction, it's maybe not the technology's fault so much as the approach to the marketplace. And I learned this from my time that I spent with Clayton Christensen. I was a senior fellow for a year with him and really got to dive deep into some of his amazing theories that he brilliantly came up with. He, at the time, was nominated as the #1 business thinker in the world. And he has a set of theories that have withstood the test of time, disruption being one of them. And these frameworks I found to be very reliable over the course of my career to helping me understand what's happening and to understand what will happen. So I thought that I would pick one of these frameworks called disruption to share with you today and really to dive deep into it. We hear the term thrown around a lot. What does it really mean? There's another framework we don't have time for, but I would just encourage all of you to file it away. It's called the Jobs to Be Done framework. Clay told me one time, he says, I think that the Jobs to Be Done framework is actually, even though it's not as popular, I think it's more impactful than disruption. And basically what it is, just so you know, it's a way for you as a management team and leaders to talk with each other about how to go about innovating and integrating around those jobs that your clients really need to be done. So I encourage you to check that out. So disruption is not just some new technology that's exciting. We talk a lot about AI. We're going to talk a little bit about AI today. Don't worry, we'll cover it. But it's a technology and a strategy lens. You all know your businesses better than I do. All I'm going to do is provide you with a lens, like a set of glasses that you can put on so you can look at your business and that you can say, all right, how do we successfully navigate disruption? How do we be a disruptor? How do we avoid being disrupted? We're going to cover that here. So a deep understanding of disruption will help you discern which technologies would be a distraction to build or to buy, which, how and when should we adopt new technologies, understand the competitive landscape today and to be able to predict the future, and then finally, how do you best respond to the competitive forces that are out there? So we're going to just take a field trip away from dentistry for a minute and talk about the steel industry. Sounds really low tech, emerged out of the Industrial Revolution, but the same principles that apply in this steel industry apply to all industries when it comes to disruption. So what you see here, the graph on the right, is just an outline of the 4 different segments that were present in the industry, and you can see at the bottom, you've got rebar, and then there's angle iron, and structural steel, and sheet steel. And why they're arrayed in that way is on the y-axis you have the steel quality. So the sheet steel is actually really hard to make. And the other thing about sheet steel is that it occupies the largest space in the market. The most volume of steel goes towards sheet steel. But it's really hard to make. The rebar, on the other hand, not too hard to make. The quality's not that great. It doesn't need to be that great, though. It also doesn't occupy a huge percentage of the market share either. The other interesting thing, just kind of in the setup here, is that the harder stuff to make is the stuff where you make more money. So you get 25 to 30% gross margins on the sheet steel, whereas the rebar at the bottom, you're only getting 7% margins. And of course, in the middle, you can see where those land. So what happened in the late 60s was there was a new technology, and the good news was this new technology, which was an electric, it was an arc furnace, electric arc furnace. It could melt this scrap metal, and it could, out the other end of this process, it could produce steel. That was the good news. And it could do it for 30 to 50% cheaper than these big, massive Industrial Revolution plants could do. That's good. Here's the problem. The stuff it was creating that came out the other end was really bad quality. And this problem ended up being a huge blessing because it forced them to do something that they might not have done otherwise. And that was, they said, well, we got this steel here, but it's not that good. So we're going to just make some rebar out of it. So they got into the rebar market. Now, you've got to imagine the integrated steel companies that are spending all their time making this tons and tons of sheet metal steel and all these other things. They have their board meeting. Somebody, maybe not, says, hey, we're having some trouble down in rebar. Got a competitor, and they're starting to, they can do this stuff for cheaper. Their process is garbage. They can only make rebar. But we're starting to lose the rebar market. Well, what do you think happened? There was a sigh of relief from the marketing and the sales and the operations teams. And they said, oh, thank goodness. Let them have it. We really don't want to spend any more time focusing on that stuff. We need to focus on our core competencies. So let's go back to focusing on sheet steel, and we'll keep all the other stuff too. But that's where the money is. That's where we're going to make our margins. And so it was great. The integrated steel companies were super happy that these new competitors came along, and the new competitors were happy. They called themselves mini mills. They used this process, and a much smaller mill was required to make this stuff. And then this funny thing happened as they got into the rebar market and were successful there, and there's more competition. When they got traction, there was more investment that became available to invest in the technology. The technology improved. So then they got to a point where they said, it's starting to get a little competitive down here in rebar. But our quality is good enough where we can now go and do angle iron, and then we get 12% margins. Let's do it. And so then they start to move up market. And so the board meeting back at the executive meeting at the steel companies, they're sitting around and somebody says, hey, these mini mills are starting to get into angle iron and bars, and they can offer it for cheaper. Not really much to worry about. Their quality isn't nearly what it would need to be to even approach sheet steel. And so there was a sigh of relief that goes across the exec team. Now marketing and sales don't have to worry about maintaining all those accounts, and they can just focus on selling more sheet steel. And the good news is it even looks good to Wall Street because their profitability increases. And so so they get out of there, and our new mini mills come in. Well, the funny thing about technology is if it is allowed to get traction, it gets more investment. And it gets more investment, it improves. And so then the quality improves to the point where the mini mill guys say, I think you've heard this story before, they say, hey, why don't we get into structural steel? The margins are better, and our quality's good enough, we can do this. And so that's what they do. And so back at the board, or the executive meeting again, say, hey, these guys are getting into structural steel now, and of course it's been another 5 years, and now they're looking at, okay, well, what do we do now? Look, they can't touch us in sheet steel. All right? That's our bread and butter. That's where we're making all of our money. We're just going to double down on our core competency. Let them have this lower end margin part of our business, and we're going to focus all our efforts on sheet steel. And so that's fine. And so everybody was happy about that. And then the mini mills took over structural steel. And the funny thing about technology is when it has traction, it gets more investment, it improves. And so now something a little bit different happened. The technology got good enough for them to do sheet steel. And when they got into that market, the board, the executive meeting was a bit different. And they said, okay, now we need to craft a competitive response here. All right, let's talk about price wars. Let's do this. And they tried some of those things. They couldn't sustain it because remember, the technological core that was created way back almost 20 years earlier was that they could create steel 30 to 50% cheaper, and they had a business model and a profit formula that stayed that way the whole ride up the market. And so these integrated steel companies could not compete. They could temporarily lower price, but at the end of the day, they were boxed out. And that's how hundreds of billions of dollars were transferred from these big integrated steel companies over into these disruptive companies. So just to kind of review the model here, you had an improvable technological core that if it gained traction, you get more investment and get better and better over time. In this case, it was an electric arc furnace. You had a key strategy element. Now, they probably didn't realize this at the time. Like I said, they were kind of forced into it. But they started at the low end of the market. That's all their technology would do. It was only good enough to do a certain thing. And because of that, it was less threatening to the incumbents. It was the least profitable customers, the ones that were the most painful for the incumbents to have to deal with. And so they readily and they voluntarily handed them over. Okay, so here's one thing that Clay shared with me. He said, they did a study of startup companies that were taking new technologies to the market. And they studied the groups that directly attacked the incumbents and said, look, we're gonna disrupt the industry. We're gonna change things here. And they went after the incumbents' main, most profitable customer base. Okay? Turns out those guys that took that approach with the new disruptive technologies, I'm putting that in air quotes, they had a 6% chance of success. Companies that use new technologies but went at it this way and went after the customers that the incumbents didn't care about had a 5 times higher chance of success. And so you can see it's not the technology. Technology is the engine. It's like you're building a car around it with the strategy. And so the question is, now that you understand deeply what disruption actually is, I'd love you to consider how and when will your current business be disrupted? And to kind of help walk you through kind of the self-reflection process, I've decided to look my own company that I work at, eAssist Dental Solutions, in the mirror. And Rob Linder is our Chief Strategy Officer, and unfortunately he's in the front row, so he can yank me off the stage if I say too much about our strategy. But I'll try to be careful there. We're going to talk a little bit about AI. Some headlines here. I'm not sure if you caught them, but man creates a machine that can think, machines to perform human functions soon, and artificial intelligence, the new frontier. So again, really exciting technology. That's exactly what they thought in the 50s and 60s when these quotes came out. So the question is, what's going to cause these technologies to get traction today? And how are we looking at disruption at eAssist? So we don't deal with steel, but we know the markets that we serve care deeply about RCM performance, revenue cycle management performance. And so here's eAssist. And when we first started 10 years ago, this was before my time, we've got market segments that we serve there, we made a big investment in, I'll call it managerial technology. This was not disruptive. It actually helped us sustain our business. It allowed us to scale our quality. So we integrated everything together, like the sales, marketing systems, operations, the quality checks, the reporting to customers, accounting, how we pay the SCs. It was all in one big massive thing we called a hub. We still have it today. And it allowed us to scale and get bigger and grow without sacrificing quality. It allowed us to improve our quality along this trajectory here. But that's not a disruptive innovation. That helped us sustain our business. So we call those sustaining innovations. 3 years ago, we invested in AI, again, not as a disruptive innovation, but as a sustaining innovation. We wanted to give our experts, our workers, we wanted to allow them to do more work in less time. We wanted to increase their accuracy. So we've been working on, it's called Copilot. It's where all my sleepless nights and events have been here. Where we've been working on that, and that helps sustain our business. It helps us do what we do best. Helps us serve who we serve better than anybody else. But we have to ask ourselves the question, we've got to be honest. Who are our disruptors? Is there someone that today is not a threat to us? But if their technology gets traction, just like with the steel mills, if it gets traction, then it gets more investment, then it improves more over time. What does that look like for us in the future? Well, so these disruptors, we have posited that it's going to be AI-powered software. Sure, not good enough to satisfy the needs of our clients today, but if it gets traction and investment, then in the future, eventually it will start to overtake. It'll take kind of our low end, and then it'll go up, just like with the steel mills. And so we're going to talk about some ways that you can respond to disruption. And this is something we talk about a lot at eAssist. But just to, again, reiterate, there's sustaining innovations which help your business now, and they're not disruptive, but they'll help you do what you do better. And then there's disruptive innovations that upend your business or upend other people's businesses that are above you in the marketplace. So let's talk about how you can respond if you're being disrupted. You really have three options here. And so I'd like you to just put yourself in your own shoes and put these lenses on for your business and think about which of these might make some sense. I'll also maybe pepper in a few things we've talked about with eAssist as well, if I don't get in too much trouble for it. So first of all, you could ignore it. Not a bad idea. Remember those board meetings back at the steel companies? They actually became more profitable and got some thumbs up from Wall Street because they ignored it. They said, hey, let's get rid of our less profitable customers. Our margins will go up overall. But you've seen the story. It only works for a certain amount of time, and then you get boxed out, right? So you really need to start thinking about these other two options. This one, Max Wessel was a colleague of mine when we were working with Clay together. He proposed there may be an option if you can change the axes of performance. So this would be to say, back on our graph, for example, we had RCM performance there. Well, what if really, for some of our customers, maybe the dentist really didn't care about RCM performance per se, but he cared about generating an accurate treatment plan or having real-time payment of claim or notification. And so maybe that's actually more important than RCM performance, right? Which is what we've built our current model around. So we're actually looking at some ways to change the y-axis so that the disruptors actually don't exist on that plane. It's like we've come out to a different plane. The disruptors are back competing on the other plane, where it's RCM performance, and we're competing on a new plane. So like we're talking with one of the largest carriers right now about doing some of those things, where we can kind of integrate around what we believe is one of the core jobs to be done in the dental office. Another thing you can do is disrupt yourself. So this one's going to be a little bit to wrestle around in your head, but if you can imagine your own company as the incumbent steel mill companies. If you want to disrupt yourself, the only way to do it, and people have tried to do it other ways, but the only way to do it is you create an autonomous organization inside your company. And this autonomous organization's got its own sales, its own marketing, its own operations team. Because if you go to your existing team and you say, hey, we want to be disruptive here, you're doing a great job at sheet steel, we want you to start selling rebar, they're going to say, hey, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not going to get a big bonus out of that. I can't get my teams to sell that. We can't market that. And it's just not going to fly. They're not going to support it. But if you can have a different organization that comes in and says, yeah, we're going to be the disruptive ones. They have a different profit formula, a different technology. Then your existing teams are going to say, hallelujah, give them all of this stuff we don't want to deal with anymore. And that allows you to disrupt yourself. And so eventually over time, you move up market just like you're your own mini mill operation and you're taking over your larger one. And so that's how you can disrupt yourself. So just kind of in summary here, I would just invite all of you to go back as teams and talk about how disruption is present and relevant to your business today. I'd also invite you to think about now, what does the future look like? Because that's the beautiful thing about this framework is it's not just about how do you respond today, it's how do you predict the future and what can you do about it today. So how do you respond? And then are you going to deploy new technologies to sustain and help you deliver on your current business model better? Or do you need to deploy them in a disruptive way, either to your own business or to other businesses? So I just want to close by saying thanks for this opportunity. I'm glad that we've had a chance to cover what I think is one of the most impactful theories here, and that something I hope will help you all build and sustain successful businesses. And thanks very much.